Welcome to our podcast, LiveSolar. My name is Tony Capicelli.
And I'm Sandino Thompson. We're going to be talking about all things electrifying Middle America, empowering our communities.
Today we're talking development, solar development, how it integrates, and we're with two of the kind of foremost developers in the Oklahoma City area, with Jeff Vanhoose and Mark Beffort. And I'm pumped to be here today because I think solar has to start with those that are developing out the community and the built environment. And you can go retrofit some houses, but if you really want to make an impact, you got to go kind of get to the systemic thinking of how to build out a community.
Yeah, and I try to tell people all the time, like a lot of what this business is, because it is new, even though solar's been around forever, the opportunities are very new, it's really about education, and you have to educate the people who are doing the work and help them understand how this, from a builder's perspective, how this is a new element, it's a new technology, it's a new opportunity for development. So it has a financial benefit, but it also has a practical benefit, like a lot of other technologies in the building space.
And one of the things I'm also excited about in this particular episode is builders, and how you build is part of the equation. But the folks that are building out the developments as well, or doing design build to suite, can influence what's built, right? And like that's the thing, because you think about how you get a tenant, how you build a long-term sustainable plan, how you lower operating costs, how you put together a project. And I know like Jeff for years has put in geo-thermal, thinking about that, kind of leading that. We're gonna talk about that today on the show. And Mark has always been on the cutting edge of different types of projects around the city and thinking where can I create value for tenants. So yeah, it's an interesting one that I think is kind of, I would say, at the seminal point of how you change community. So that being said, let's jump in with our guest. So Jeff and Mark, I don't know who wants to go first, but what I would like to know, give us a little background of what you've done in Oklahoma City and what you care about.
All right, Jeff, you go first.
Okay. I'm Jeff Vanhoose, Vanhoose Construction. We're 43 years young.
Yeah, that's right.
So
family-run business, right?
Yeah, I'm second generation, although I've been there almost the whole time. Mark Beffort and I jumped into Oklahoma City business at the exact same time.
That's
We're
crazy.
both the same age.
Yep.
And we've known each other that whole time.
And you both dress way nicer than Sandino and I. So maybe there's something about solar versus development. But
In fact, all the way back in like 1987, what really put Vanhoose Construction on the map was a project in one of Beffort's buildings for OG&E.
Downtown at Corporate Tower, 101 North Robinson.
right?
We still own it today.
it's a beautiful building.
Yeah.
So
awesome.
we were somewhat of a no-name company, had been around just a few years, and I had an opportunity with Mark to do 17,000 square foot floor plates for OG&E. And after that, I was going around town telling everybody that OG&E was one of my customers.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And let's jump to Mark. But before, you talk a little bit. You started early on kind of doing cool stuff with geothermal.
I did. So one thing that I've always wanted to set myself apart from my competition, and I'm a design build contractor. And so it's not all about brick and mortar. I've always wanted to be a trusted advisor.
Okay.
And I saw geothermal in 2005 with the help of our friend Dan Ellis.
Yeah.
As a great opportunity to get in front of a client and show them how we can do tax credits and bonus depreciation and save on their utilities. And it's a no-brainer.
And that's why I think we're going to jump into that as we get into the podcast. But that's one of the things that separated you and actually was our initial connection point. I didn't know you. You lived across the street from me.
Correct.
But Dan Ellis is like, I know a guy's thought different about development and building for over a decade.
Yeah, when we talk about Dan Ellis, he's the CEO of Comfort Works, which is one of the largest geothermal companies here in the Oklahoma area.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then before that, he was the president of Climate Master, who's
Engineers,
the largest manufacturer of water source heat pumps, which is the primary unit in geothermal.
So you've been involved in energy efficiency and thinking about the built structure in a little more progressive way for decades here. So
Correct.
It's exciting. All right, Mr. Beffort, up to you. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in Oklahoma City.
Mark Beffort, developing a lot of stuff here in Oklahoma City. Our primary project right now is the Convergence in the Innovation District. And we're doing a few different energy efficiency things, but the project that really makes that project special is it's creating a new environment around new technologies through life science, as well as new technologies in energy, as well as aerospace and aviation department. So it's really not a typical office building. It's an ecosystem that we're creating to create and advance things like LiveSolar.
And I think that this is interesting. You can talk to this about as much as anyone on the innovation district and what the impact that'll make.
Yeah. So one of the things that made me really excited when we got you guys together is like my experience with Mark. I didn't know that about you guys, Jeff, and getting started with OG&E in one of those buildings. But I grew up in the 80s in Oklahoma City and watching how, people came into the market or folks invested into the market and really kind of protected the market at a time when we had one of those ups and downs that tends to happen in the oil and gas industry. So it's interesting for me to be able to look to the past and look forward at where we're headed now with something like convergence, which is really taking advantage of all of the large sort of GDP growth drivers. And now we're thinking about things like energy, not just in relation to our oil and gas industry or our wind industry that's come on over the last 10, 12 years, but we're also thinking about solar, we're thinking about geothermal, people talk about heat pumps, all those things sort of work together. You guys are going to create an ecosystem that is bringing those things to the forefront, but also encouraging people, I think, to think about how all of those pieces play together, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what we're creating is an environment that an individual, no matter what walk of life you are, can have a seat at the table in our development and hanging around other like-minded folks and corporations and money to allow your business to thrive. And we're going to have some announcements really soon about some of the folks that actually have committed to being part of that ecosystem, even around the city of Oklahoma City, because we're building the Innovation Hall for the city of Oklahoma City, which is a public facility that's geared around workforce development, around in the life science, as well as all forms of new technology.
All right, so we could literally talk just about convergence, and it's an incredible thing and how it's working. It's going to work, and I can't wait to hear the announcements. But you short sold the 43 years before that. Yep. So I'm going to quickly pull out. You've done a lot. You picked that one piece, but you've done a lot of projects. You've kind of shaped how property and development has been done in the city. You've been integrated into the texture of our council, of our the entire structure of downtown. Feels like you've touched it. Yeah. And that's important because the things you do obviously help influence the way future developers work. So give us a couple other projects that you're proud of throughout those years. You don't have to go all the way back to 43 years, but you can, and whatever you would like.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, there's a lot of projects. We do control a good portion of downtown, both through the hospitality, the retail sector, the office sector, parking garages. So we set out to really activate downtown to the best we could. But I'm a firm believer that life we're meant to live together.
Yes.
Right? And we don't sit behind a computer screen in our home working. So, but it's up to us from a community, both from the public and private sector, to work together to build that community that is attractive to folks, right?
Yep.
So it's not just about having a particular retail outlet. It's about having the right retail outlet and having—
Which a lot of people don't think about. There's like, I can get money if I do this, but it's like, what would fit best? Which that is the part that people don't know about you as you're looking at your city.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because we look at every piece of sidewalk, every storefront, and how those relate together. By the way, we have a long way to go.
Oh, yeah.
But if you think about where our city was 20 years ago and where we are today, and think about what's happening and getting ready to happen over the next 20 years, it's truly remarkable how we reshape this community.
Yeah, when we think about space and place, people like Mark Beffort, people like Jeff, that when I talk about protecting the spaces, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, our downtown, our core areas were dead. And we have meticulously, as a community and as a city, brought those things back to life. And it's taken people with vision and people who understand how to make how to execute that vision in a financially responsible and meaningful way. But that's really what's lifted up the city.
Yeah. And it's, you said something, you've done this. Is it 43 years? Is that really?
It's about 40 years, yeah.
40 years of a career building. A lot of people have seen Oklahoma the last 20 years, like, make major advancements in Oklahoma City. Mm-hmm. But you said the next 20 is going to be crazy, right? That's incredible to think about with how far we've come. I feel like I think a lot of people think, we've kind of peaked, but there's a lot of room left to go. And you're only working in a 60-year period, and you're stewarding a community that's really young.
Right.
So we're like, what you're doing right now is shaping like a new, like, I don't know. I don't think people sometimes see the context of why these decisions matter beyond them. Right.
Yeah, that's a great point, because we're actually building a city for the next 100 years. If you think about what the Devon Tower did and created the TIF district that then redeveloped all the infrastructure in downtown Oklahoma City. They tore up every street and built that infrastructure that's going to last another 100 years. Yes, you may see a little piece of construction here and there on the roads and stuff, but we have an infrastructure that allows us to build on that 100 years. And what Mayor Holt has talked about with the new stadium that'll be built, hopefully for the Thunder. We all have to hopefully go to a vote and approve that.
Yep.
On top of $1 billion in maps. So think about our first maps program. It was $400 million.
Yeah.
Our last one was $1 billion. So what's it going to be 10 years from now? Maybe $2 billion. And we continue to invest in ourselves, and that's so critical to the long-term success.
Yeah. So maps as a tax incentive for those who might not be familiar, at the municipal level, penny sales tax, and really focused on capital infrastructure investment, really improving quality of life in Oklahoma City. So that's something that has been attributed to a lot of the growth and a lot of the success that we've seen. But it doesn't happen, to your point, with the people at the table.
That's right.
I wanted to go backwards about Beffort for just a second.
Yeah, please.
He's the hardest working, most humble person I know.
People don't always know Mark.
Yeah.
Like, they don't know what Mark's doing, right? And he doesn't like, do you have social? No. Do you do this? No. Do you do podcasts? No. I'm just going to do work. I'll see you in 20 years. And like, that's what I love.
Beffort and I start texting quite a bit about business at 4 o'clock in the morning.
4 o'clock in the morning. That's right. That's exactly right. Almost every morning.
Almost every morning.
All right. Well, I won't be on those text threads, but that's really good.
So I have a question that relate to some of Mark's buildings downtown. I build a lot of new construction, and it's not downtown.
Yeah.
And so new construction, design, build, super easy to do solar on the roof.
Yeah.
But let's say you have a 200,000 square foot building downtown. It only has a 10,000 square foot roof. Mm-hmm. So there's not room to do solar there. I'm new to solar.
Yeah.
I've been in the geothermal world for a long time. I'm just now jumping on this solar curve. I like it. Is there a way that, say, the utility provider could allow Mark to go outside of downtown, buy an acre, and put in solar field, and then get an address to downtown?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah. So what you're describing is called aggregate net metering, and in Oklahoma, we don't have that particular policy in place. Just as near as Arkansas, which is another one of the markets that we work in and we engage with folks, they have aggregate net metering.
Mark would be happier with me.
And yes, and so then you have people who have maybe a portfolio of buildings, and some are more or land, and some is more conducive.
1 million square foot building that can power 8 other buildings.
Sure,
right.
Then you get the benefit of being able to aggregate all of those that are basically have the same account. With the utility, we hope at some point, with our friends at OG&E and PSO, that we would get there.
And it's
in
really
Oklahoma.
even a state thing. It's a legislative position that Arkansas took on aggregate net metering.
I see it as simple as just, if I go buy this acre and I put a solar field in, and I want to assign 201 North Robinson, whatever.
Yeah,
I want to assign that address to that field.
No, you're spot on. And honestly, it's just aggregate. And like you live across the street from me. I have a barn and I have a home. I couldn't even power my home, which is 400 feet away, with my barn. Yeah. That's literally how much I could. So I had to trench it. So
even if it's the same ownership?
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's aggregate. Again, I have to have on site, on my meter, on my service to accomplish that goal, or I have to trench to where my service. So I literally had to combine my barn and my home service for my barn to power my home.
And so Tony's on a lot that's relatively suburban, right? But even on ranches and farms, I mean, a lot of the cost and consideration we have to do is we do a lot of work with folks in those spaces, and there are a lot of benefits, but we have to consider the electrical setup, because we basically have to get you on the same meter service, because that's the way the rules are now. That's what will count in Oklahoma, because we don't have that ability to aggregate your meters.
And in an appropriate way, you jumped into tactics, which I love. And I want to get into some of these, but I want to back up. I want to address one point. Mark was one of the first customers when we started 820 that I came to, very, very generous to me, saying, I said, hey, Mark, I don't know how to spell solar. Would you like me to put it on all your beautiful buildings? And he said, absolutely. So he gave me every tower in downtown. And like, I should have known physics is not going to work, right? Because like, there's like all 20, 30, 40. Devon Tower, I had that one as well. Like, and everyone I came back and said, I could have looked at this as an elementary school student and said, not enough roof space.
Not enough
right?
roof space, yeah.
And so, but then you pivot and you say, what can we do downtown? And there's actually a lot of opportunity. There's parking, there's some storage, there's West Village, things of that nature. Multifamily is great. There's some stuff over on 4th Street. You've got some of this Midtown market. We've got some great like 2-3 story warehouses, mixed use. So you find where you can and you take opportunity, because solar doesn't apply to everything, right? We're not trying to displace every energy type in the world. We're trying to layer in another one. We've been incredible in oil and gas. We've been great in wind. We've just not been good in solar, even though we're 6th, 7th most sun of any city. So it's like, I need to look at Mark differently. And that's when you said, oh, let's go talk about my storage facilities. Let's go talk about,
That's right. And I think you've actually done it on our storage facilities.
We're close, but absolutely. They're great deals.
Yeah.
They're great deals.
It's interesting. So yesterday I got a call from one of our retail tenants.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a retail tenant that has a long-term lease. It's a fairly large footprint.
Yeah.
And they said, hey, I want to consider putting solar panels on the top of the building because my long-term lease allows me to get that payback and lower my utility costs.
That's awesome.
Yeah, one of the best sort of cases that I think started to help even us crack the code on understanding good use. And again, even in the core, we're looking at breweries. So their profile tends to be a lot of manufacturing activity taking place. And what we learned is they tend to have those same kind of leases. And there's this benefit where they can kind of recapture some of that value. So we've really been able to start unlocking some of that same kind of potential. That profile, though, that Tony's talking about the right amount of roof space and the right height. And then we've seen retail tenants or operators in those spaces be able to even go to the landholder or the landowner and say, like, I think this is a benefit for me. How can you help me take advantage of this?
Absolutely. That's happening yesterday.
And your world, I mean, I would imagine for the most part is, obviously built environment. It's going to last for over 100 years. Mm-hmm. But then what type of tenants do I want? How do I want to attract the right ones? And how do I create a mutually beneficial relationship? And tenants are starting to ask that question way more and actually looking for that. I know that Apple and Amazon won't go into certain communities unless they give them access anymore. And they're going to lead these type of questions. So I think one of the reasons that solar hasn't been adapted as much is because landlords think, well, it's a triple net lease, which is the tenant is paying for it. Mm-hmm. So how can I get involved? Or the tenant's like, well, I don't know how to talk to my landlord because I want solar. I'd rather do that for my brand, my business, my stakeholders, but they own the roof, right? Yeah. So it's like this stalemate that can easily be unlocked.
Yeah. Well, if you're and sorry, Jeff, we're doing all the talking here, but
well, I do have the way I think about this is when I'm building suburban office building for a client. I want to do what's best for that client long term, not short term. And solar to me is a long term play. So it's a quick payback, but I want you to think about, okay, you have a suburban office, you put solar on it, you have a net zero electric bill. You pay for that solar system in 4.5 years. And then from then on, you're putting money in the wind column for yourself. Yeah. Now let's think about 15 years down the road. We have a little downturn in office space. Now it's really competitive and there's a big tenant out there that you want.
And you can control utility prices now.
You don't have a utility bill in your office and everybody else does. No,
that's huge.
And so all of a sudden, in 15 years from now, instead of $2 a square foot for electric, it's probably going to be $3.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden you have a $3 square foot advantage over your competition to get a tenant in.
So I'm going to back us up. We're into incredible details, but this sounds weird, but why do you all think it hasn't worked so far? Is it education? Is it understanding? Is it energy prices? Like, when I say that, we were ranked 47th to 51st worst state to do solar energy in the United States as of 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. Now we're making incredible headway. People say, well, why would you start a solar company in Oklahoma? Well, we did a lot. We talked to residents, commercial owners, politicians. Everyone's like, we want it. We want it. We talked to Democrats, Republicans. We want it. We want it. But like, we didn't have the legislative pieces in place to do this net metering until 19. Mm-hmm. But it started picking up, and now it really is. But why do you think it didn't at first? Like, what are your thoughts? And then why are we talking about it now, where you're actually engaging a tenant that asks that question?
Great question. So I think if you look at the big picture, so you have to have the right ownership structure. There's got to be the right motivation from both sides.
Yep.
If it's an owner that owns the property 100% by themselves, the decision gets a little bit easier because they're making
one person's making a decision.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you have a investment group that's making a decision, or the one person like myself making it for behalf of the investment group, you have to make sure that is the right financial decision for the overall investment of the property.
Okay.
So, and then it gets to education, but also people. Everyone's on a different spectrum of global warming or not global warming and all those things. So as I take a big picture, if you go to Google Earth, and you go to the opening page, it shows a picture of the Earth, right? And you type in your address, and it kind of zeroes down, goes around, it goes right down to your spot. You're going, okay, we are the United States, 5% of the population of the world, and of that 5% of the population, I'm one individual. And how do I look at the Earth and go all the way down, and I'll go to my one? How am I really going to make a difference in global warming? Okay. And so I think it is education about how we're going to make a difference there. And it's really understanding the financial implications. And Jeff's exactly right. I think that the operating expenses, if those that actually take geothermal or solar or all the other environmentally friendly and utility reduction items, if you put that in a financial model and you spend the money today, there is a long-term financial impact as well as a short-term environmental impact.
And long-term, both.
And long-term too. Absolutely. So,
I love what you said. I'm going to pivot this to Jeff. How do I make a difference? How do I, as one person, I make a difference? And that's actually the only way we can. Right? It starts with individuals, and like that thinking has to shift. We're such a short-term society. Like, is this going to be good for me right now? Am I going to be pleasured by this thing? Like no thought about health, no thought about anything else. And so Jeff, like the systemic thinking in geothermal hasn't even fully picked up yet, but you saw it as that 5-year, 8-year payback, long-term property ownership, long-term assets. And it's like, this is a no-brainer. Yet I don't know, other people are doing it, but maybe it's similar to solar in the way it's going to need to be adopted.
But I got into the geo way before the curve, which was good. I think back to your initial question about solar and how it's picking up speed now. One of the things when you compare it to geothermal is when you're doing a payback economic schedule on geothermal, you get to deduct the conventional cost of if you were going to put in a conventional system.
Yeah, because you have to put in mechanical. Right. You can't avoid putting in something.
You're going to put in something. So do you do conventional or do you do geothermal?
Yeah.
Well, when you're looking at your payback, you get to deduct the cost of that conventional versus the geothermal, and your payback is 1 year.
Yeah.
With solar, it's an option. It's not a mandatory thing. So I think the government needs to look at this because they have geothermal and solar very equal as far as tax credits and depreciation. Maybe there needs to be some more help with the solar because it is a 5-year payback, not a 1-year payback.
Yeah, so that's interesting. If you're looking at your like appreciation value of like the asset, you might be able to get to a 1 year just because it's like a pool at your house. Put $1 into your pool, you're getting 20 cents back.
Yep.
You put $1 into a good kitchen remodel, you might get $1 back, right. But like solar, you put $1 in and you actually have put a value on your building. But to your point, you have a choice. You don't have to build a power plant. You can use OG&E, you can use PSO, you can use a co-op. And so it's that thinking you have to shift. But one thing that people don't understand is your operational cost isn't an option. You're going to pay an electric cost that's increased.
And it's going to go up.
That increased in the third quarter in Oklahoma City. We had the highest increase in electric costs in the nation.
Right. No, I see it on all my buildings.
Yeah. So
I'm probably the largest utility payer in the city of Oklahoma City. So I know exactly what you're talking about.
So it's a weird thing though. It's like not the upfront cost, but we're all paying it. It's not like you don't have an option to connect to a power source.
Yeah.
It's just how you think about building it.
So I think that's where there are some similarities because everybody does have a utility bill. right? So whereas you don't necessarily have to include solar, you are making the calculus on how you're going to pay for your power. And one of the things I think about, and I don't know, you guys would have a really good view for how accurate this is. So we did start this effort in middle part of the country. We obviously have a lot of things going in Oklahoma where we have some of the cheapest energy. Our thinking was that if we can prove out the model on how solar works here, then you're then at that point, sort of, we're just kind of playing with house money in other markets.
Yeah.
So, and we feel like we're starting to see that. So again, going back to mentality, what I'm curious about is we do have some of the cheapest energy in the country, but the price is still going up. Right. And so our perspective is not about California or New York or East Coast, West Coast prices, but our perspective in Oklahoma or in Texas is about crazy fluctuations. And we know that the price curve is not going down. No, it's going up. Yeah. And solar is absolutely, when you think about the utility, it's a stabilizing piece. You have some 30-year certainty, a 30-year hedge on what those costs are going to look like.
I mean, if you have the ability to lower your operating costs, you should do it. You should do every means to do that. One of the challenges today is the financial structure with interest rates going up. So if you're building a building and you want to put in solar or you want to put in geothermal and it costs you 10% more, 15% more on that particular line item, not the whole project, that particular line item, what is the cost to do that? What? So the interest costs have gone up. Yep. Pricing has gone up. But I would say that if you can get a 5 to 7 year payback, it is far better to do that, and we're going to do that in every project that we have going on.
And it is. I think 5 to 7 is actually a good rule of thumb. Yeah. Like sometimes you get in the 4s, which is great. Yeah. It's all depending on the tariff, the roof, the science, the math, but.
Jeff's in the sweet spot.
Which we'll talk about your project.
He's stuck.
Don't brag too much.
Yeah, he's stuck on 4.5 years. I mean, usually we talk to be about 5 to 8 on this.
But
it does work.
The thing again, and I'll go back to it. It's just longer term thinking. You talk about operational costs. A lot of people buy a building. It's like construction costs. No, if you're going to hold a building, you're going to be paying cost. How do you think about that?
And that's a key. Are you going to hold it? Yeah. Some people, or most developers, are building to turn around and flip. So they don't care what's behind or what they open up construction costs so they can make a greater profit.
And that is really interesting. Yeah. I like longer term thinking, obviously, as just thinking about stewardship and how we think about communities. But what I would say to that developer, and this might not hold water, both of you guys can argue, is depending on how fast you're going to flip it. If you're going to flip it in a year, okay. Yeah. But if you're going to flip it in 3 to 5, I can make the case that I've added an appreciation to your project. You can extract that money back out, and you can have an asset that you can be proud of, and that you potentially even can profit on that piece from the buyers of the future, because we're getting to where the puck's going. We're not staying here.
Well, you're exactly right, because what you ultimately sell, and what I do, is an income stream. That income stream is very simple. It's your revenue minus your expenses, get your net operating income, which creates your value.
Can you say that?
All right. This podcast, we've unlocked 40 some odd years of history.
So the expense structure, by the way, I'm not the smartest guy in the book, but the biggest number is that revenue, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The next is expenses. If you can lower that expenses, that NOI increases, which
Divided
gives you a higher value.
And then boom.
So think about this. If it costs you 10% more to put in solar or geothermal,
on that line item.
On that line item, but it reduces your expenses by 50 cents. You get a 12 times return on that, which is far greater than the 10% on just that one line item.
That thinking is what developers that are going to sell it within 5 years. Now, if you're going to sell in 2, you got to give back some years of credit. So we'd stop that. But if I love what you just said, and I hope folks can realize, if I'm a developer, I can still do the right long-term thing and make a financial gain.
And do what's right for your community.
Yeah, spot on.
So one of the things that might speed solar along is to educate people that are building buildings on the life cycle cost. Now, life cycle cost has been around for a long time. I think I was introduced to it 20 years ago the first time. And it really caught my eye because the upfront construction cost of a project is nothing compared to the life cycle cost.
People, who thinks that? Whenever you have to educate your buyers, probably.
You do. So one of like on geothermal, the equipment lasts 30 years. Conventional lasts 15. That's a huge life cycle cost reduction.
Yeah.
And solar fits right in there.
30-year products.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like on my project in 30 years, I'm $547,000 to the good in my pocket. And because the government's helping out, my solar was $136,000.
Yep.
The government's paying around $76,000 of that. And I'm going to save $8,500 a year at today's utility cost.
Yeah.
And so it cost me $50,000 out of pocket.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to have an electric bill from now on.
I mean, 50 grand at the end of the year. I mean, at the end of the 30 year, you make how much?
$547,000.
I think you need to donate some of that back to the solar business to perpetuate.
Oh, there you go. Pay it forward. Pay it forward.
Yes.
There's a model.
Yeah.
But, so, okay, you now have a zero energy building.
Yeah.
Which means, and people don't know what that means, but it's simple. Back to this revenue minus expenses equals net. It's your consumption is offset in a year by your production on site.
On site.
Like, there are not many zero energy buildings in Oklahoma. And how hard was it really to get there?
It's easy.
We think it's hard. You have this geo plus solar, so your balance is right, but we only used half your roof. I mean, it's not even, we could have used more. So,
now let's get back to a little, this is kind of, I'm going to have a little fun with you guys because this is psychology, right? So you guys are in a great business because every single month when your client pays their utility bill, who are they thinking about?
I hope it's us.
And are they having good thoughts?
Yeah.
Good thoughts.
Yeah.
I love Tony. I love Sandino.
So what you're saying is when people write me a check, they don't like me.
They don't like
You're an expense. I've eradicated it.
So it's kind of like when you get married, and I've been married 37 years. I can walk through my house and remember who gave me that little gift that's on that shelf.
That's cool. That's cool.
Because you remember,
remember that.
oh, that was my cousin Susie that got me that.
That's
and,
really
and you're going to give a gift to your client, and every single month they're going to remember you for that gift.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's
That really is cool.
Yeah, it's a flip. That's actually that's not where I thought you were headed. So I'm actually super impressed. But that's a really different way to sort of think about what that proposition is. I mean, one of the things that you guys sort of hinted around on, but I want to kind of layer back because we talk about this a lot, is that so solar and geothermal to an extent, but solar on the production side, it allows you to think about energy different. So we talked about utility costs. But and that's a part of the proposition. Even if you're talking about somebody who's going to flip a piece of property, you now have a piece of property that is generating power, right? And it obviously uses power. So regardless of how you think about it, that just has a value. And we start thinking about that. I mean, we talked about kind of all the benefits and sort of the
All the
follow-ons
stakeholders
of
that care about that.
But just that idea of a value on your property that it actually it generates, right? Part of what it's using. I mean,
for millennia, every property generated its own, like whether it's water or wind, and then we outsourced all of it. And now we're coming back to just a basic, we can produce energy right here.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thought.
No, it is. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we've talked about a lot of things on solar, which tee up other questions if you like, but I also want to know EV charging, which is a part of electrification. You know, with the new infrastructure and the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a lot of money is going into not just the infrastructure side, but also into new and used electric vehicles. Every major manufacturer is going that direction. That's going to fundamentally change. It's not just upper echelon folks that are going to have a EV. It's going to be everyone in your multifamily. It's going to say, can I pull in and park and charge anymore? Can I do these things at a commercial building where my employees ask for that benefit? Can I, have a actual place where I can charge?
Right.
Yeah.
What are the places where people are spending, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours at a time? And all of a sudden, any of those places, people now think about that.
Or can I eat restaurant here and for an hour and a half get charged?
Right.
I'm going to go to your restaurant over another. But how do you all think about even that piece of the infrastructure?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the office building world, it's about the amenity mix that you can offer.
Yeah.
And one of those amenities is absolutely EV stations. So we 6-7 years ago put EV stalls in every one of our buildings and garages. So we have them at every property already. Now, we only have in most properties or garages 4 of them.
Yeah.
I will tell you that the usage in Oklahoma isn't that great. We allow people to pull in and charge. You get the first 2 hours free.
Oh, wow.
Now you got to be our tenant.
I know where are those at? I got I'm struggling to find those spots, man.
So you get the first 2 hours free. And then after that, because we want to make sure others have the ability to use it, we don't want somebody pulling into a garage, sit there all day, go to the office, come back, nobody else can use it. I will tell you the usage isn't that great because people are getting their charge at home or whatever, and they're just driving to the office and driving back. So, but absolutely, it's critical that it's part of your overall.
I think the multifamily is where people are going to start seeing the need because that credit was never for a used vehicle. Right. And now you can get it on a vehicle that's less than 20,000, and there's products coming out at that level. So I think multifamily developers, and this is another way to think about it. I can rent covered parking, and I can rent an EV stall, and I can now monetize how I charge for my multifamily and create a revenue stream. And the cool thing about covered parking, a lot of people do covered parking at multifamily. But if you put solar on, now the entire structure qualifies. Then down to the footings.
That's right.
For all these credits we're talking about. So like if you're building a structure, a canopy, a pergola, a walkway, a covered parking, now we get back to what you're talking about. The cost you were going to put in X to do your project on the construction side is less day one.
No, that's exactly. That's right. That's a good point.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what we do in geothermal. It's not when you're trying to figure out your cost basis on geothermal to figure out your depreciation, you don't just include the geothermal HVAC. Somebody had to engineer it. The government allows that cost.
All the soft cost.
Electrician had to run wire and pipe and labor to hook it up.
You're right.
A plumber had to run a condensate drain. And a contractor like me had to make a very small fee.
Yep. Very small.
Extremely small.
Very small fee. And so you get to include all that to get that cost basis up as much as possible so that you maximize your tax benefit.
No, spot on.
Yeah,
and so that's exactly what you're talking about with
spot on.
Get to include it.
And so an anecdote, and I think this is actually a project that was done by a friend of you guys, is Mr. Tannenbaum. But so when we were building the Omni, there were a couple of folks I knew who were moving here from like Austin, and a couple of people moving from the West Coast, and they all ended up at the John Marshall multifamily.
Right.
Right. So and I was just like, so I ran into them as talking to people. We had mutual acquaintances, so when they got into town, it's just kind of give them the lay of the land. And I was like, why did you end up over there? And so two of them drove EVs. And it was just like I had to be somewhere.
That's where I had to be.
I had to be somewhere that allowed me to charge at my apartment while I'm here, new into town, and it was just really easy, and it was the closest thing. So when you start talking about differentiators and those kinds of things, I do think, like particularly in that multifamily market, because they're not charging at home if they live in apartments and the complexes don't have that access.
That's right.
I think that's a huge unlock.
That's huge.
I think the key word there is differentiate. You have to differentiate your property from everyone else if you want to really succeed in this world.
Yeah.
And I think EV stations absolutely are critical. And I think we're seeing a lot of suburban properties being built with parking garages.
Yeah.
But you can still put a roof on that top level because that top level is exposed.
Yeah.
So it's really not covered on that top level. Put solar on there and you get covered parking for that top level.
Mm-hmm. Pay for everything.
Pay for
revenue.
everything. That's exactly right. So.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to kind of wrap this up with a question for you all. And I'm going to lead you with one piece of it. So what would you say to someone that's a developer, builder that's thinking about integrating this? And when do you think it'll become normative? And I know you started the Oklahoma City Developers Association, which is honestly one of those like influential points that kind of changes the way people think. So you kind of have kind of a cheat code a little bit with, how you talk with your peers. But yeah, what would you say to someone thinking about this? And when does it become like anything else that's part of the process, not an abnormal piece to the process?
Yeah, I do want to put a plug in for Jeff because Jeff was the leader and currently is still the leader of the Developers Association.
Which is an incredible association.
Absolutely. We have well over 100 members now. It's only been around for a couple of years, and he has changed some key elements of how development's done within the city of Oklahoma City. So great job, Jeff.
No, it's seriously, it's impressive.
It is.
One thing incredibly proud of.
Really, we've also made great inroads to better relationships with the city.
Yeah.
So-
No. You're not doing it with a drawing swords and fighting. You guys are
Right.
sitting down at the table, which is part of community development. It's
Right.
political, private, public, working together in harmony. Yeah, there's going to be differences, but you got to work. And that's what I've noticed about it. You're not just drawing a sword.
No, Mark and Tannenbaum and some civil engineers and myself sit down with the mayor and the city manager and some of the engineers with the city and some of the city council members. We meet on a regular basis, and it's always a good, positive meeting.
Yeah. Yeah.
A great conversation. But to answer your question, so today, whether you own an existing property or if you are building a new property, you have to look at the financial implications of your operating cost and the structures. And if you're not including every form of energy efficiencies in your project, you're not going to survive. And that's existing and new products.
So you're going to start losing ground.
No, absolutely.
If you're not saying, let me evaluate. And that's the thing. You got to start.
Yeah.
Most people just don't even start because it's a thing I can't do. It doesn't make sense. That's kind of older thinking.
No, it is. And we own over 20 million square feet of stuff across the country, whether it's hotels or office buildings.
Yeah.
And it's more than that if you add all the square footage of parking garages, because we have 20,000 parking spaces across the country in different garages. And it's more than just solar, and it's more than just geothermal or EV stations. It's making sure all of your equipment, like right now we're in the process at the Martinique Hotel in downtown New York, replacing a boiler, getting the right efficiency on that boiler. So it's all across the board.
The whole built environment.
So I like to hit on them. 71% of all electricity goes to buildings.
Okay,
That's huge.
Huge.
And you're like, wow, I would have thought more went to like industrial and manufacturing.
Yeah.
I'm talking about like office buildings.
Yeah.
71%. And we all want to reduce the carbon footprint for the next generation. And just geothermal alone reduces it by like 34%.
That's huge.
Less
Big
carbon.
numbers, yeah.
It's a big number. So you put solar in there. I mean, how do they make electricity?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's coal, there's gas,
Yeah.
So I always like to hit on that, but really, I'm not going to recommend something to a client unless it's really in their best interest. And when you look at the math, it's always in their best interest.
No, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And you all, last thing, I know I said other was last, but it's funny. You all are leading the way in this middle America, small and medium-sized business product. Utility scale solar has been around for a while. Residential, you feel kind of tired of all the ads you could possibly get. But like no one served the spaces you guys are in. So it's still, I would say, and Sandino and I's perspective, you're right. But it's folks like you all coming to these conclusions and just doing it.
Yep.
Because like that's how people change is like, and then a couple buildings here and there. And then all of a sudden your entire over there, by your property, every building can look like yours. And it's not hard.
That aggregate issue that you mentioned is really, really important for me because I don't have the footprint of my buildings.
I was the one that brought that up.
We're going to talk to.
You brought it up.
We're going to talk to Governor Stitt and see what he can do. He's got 3.5 more years to get that one done.
That's true.
That's important.
It's very important.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about you when I brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is rare that I think about anybody else. But the other thing that I think could help is there is a misconception that these solar panels are all made in China.
Yeah.
And you need to get that word out that they're not all made in China.
Yeah, there's options. There's options, and there's actually domestic content adders, energy community adders. There's ways that what parts of the steel are made in the U.S. And we have. I mean, Inola just announced a gigawatt plant. We're working with an talking with their leadership, 3Sun, to put those products right there on you all's buildings, which is great. So you're right. There's a shift, and we do need to shift that dependence off of what's primary manufacturer, and we're starting to do it in North America.
And then the primary ingredient to solar when they're making it is what, silicon? Is that right?
Yeah.
And it's very available.
Yeah.
I mean, how beautiful could that be? Yeah. What if solar was great, but the silicon wasn't available?
We've talked about this a little bit in the past, but the Inflation Reduction Act, essentially gave us 10 years of industrial policy, regardless of all the other things you might think about it. So these tax credit and adders we've talked about, but also it set the tone
for localizing a lot of manufacturing. So that's a part when we talk about solar in particular, that's a part of the conversation, at least for the next 10 years, because we have that policy in place.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we have a master development agreement with the city of Oklahoma City called OKC 577. It's a partnership with Dick Tannenbaum and myself that we're developing this 577 acre tract, and primarily for manufacturing, to attract them to the state.
That's great. That's great. Well needed.
And on the Inflation Reduction Act, really helps nonprofits now, doesn't it? Because you can sell the tax credits.
We figured out a lot of ways to unlock a locked up, grid-locked market with that and a couple other strategies that we don't have time for. So that being said, thank you all so much. I know you guys are incredibly busy. It was hard to correlate schedules because of what y'all do. Probably should have done it at 4 a.m. Next time, that's when we'll do it, because I know you're up. But thank you all for the time today.
Thank you. Thank you.